The offices of Harbor Freight and Logistics in South Boston looked like any other successful shipping company. But behind the polished desks and endless cargo manifests operated one of the most powerful criminal organizations in New England. Hidden beneath its respectable image, Harbor Freight served as the financial heart of the Romano crime syndicate, laundering millions of dollars through an intricate network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent import businesses. Every employee understood that silence was the first rule of survival. Questions were dangerous, curiosity was deadly, and loyalty was valued above human life. Among the accountants who quietly balanced the organization's books was Penelope Abbott, a 28-year-old bookkeeper whose greatest wish each morning was to pass through another workday unnoticed. Penny had spent her entire life feeling invisible. Her plus-size figure, oversized knit cardigans, and thick-rimmed glasses made her believe she would never fit the world's standards of beauty. Years of judgment and rejection had taught her to keep her head down, avoid eye contact, and let her extraordinary intelligence speak only through perfectly balanced spreadsheets. Although many of her coworkers dismissed her as a shy, ordinary office worker, Penny possessed an exceptional gift for finance. Her remarkable ability to detect even the smallest inconsistency in complex financial records had earned her a position that paid far beyond what an ordinary bookkeeper could expect. She accepted the dangerous job because it offered financial security, allowing her to live independently while caring for the quiet life she treasured. As long as she remained invisible, she believed she could survive inside a world built on violence without ever becoming part of it. Above everyone stood Vincent Romano, the feared young leader of the syndicate. At only 34 years old, Vincent had inherited the criminal empire through bloodshed and ruthless determination, eliminating anyone who threatened his authority. His reputation inspired absolute obedience throughout Boston's underworld, where rival gangs whispered his name with equal parts, fear and respect. He rarely raised his voice because his silence alone carried enough weight to terrify seasoned criminals. Every decision he made was calculated, every punishment swift, and every betrayal answered with merciless precision. Yet beneath the cold exterior hid a secret no one could have imagined. For nearly 4 years, Vincent had quietly observed Penny from a distance. While glamorous socialites, wealthy heiresses, and fashion models constantly competed for his attention, none of them captured his interest the way the quiet bookkeeper did. He admired the gentle sincerity she never realized she possessed, the concentration on her face whenever she worked through impossible calculations, and the quiet kindness she showed to everyone despite receiving very little kindness in return. Convinced that a man stained by violence would only destroy someone as innocent as Penny, Vincent buried his feelings deep inside and chose to love her silently rather than risk dragging her into his dangerous world. For years, the system operated without incident because every capo understood the consequences of betraying the Romano family. Harbor Freight functioned like a perfectly engineered machine where every shipment, financial transfer, and offshore transaction followed strict internal protocols designed to hide millions of dollars from law enforcement. One of Vincent's most trusted captains was Tommy Sullivan, a veteran enforcer who had earned his position through years of apparent loyalty. No one questioned Tommy's authority, and few imagined he possessed ambitions beyond serving the Romano family, unknown to everyone except himself. However, Tommy had secretly begun stealing from the syndicate months earlier, using fake corporations, offshore accounts, and manipulated accounting records. He gradually siphoned more than $2.4 million from the organization's central trust fund while carefully hiding every trace of his theft. His scheme might have remained invisible forever, had it not crossed paths with the one accountant capable of seeing patterns others missed. Late one Tuesday evening, long after the rest of the staff had gone home, Penny stayed behind to complete a routine reconciliation of offshore transactions connected to several cargo shipments. What began as another ordinary overtime shift slowly transformed into the most terrifying night of her life. as she compared international wire transfers against shipping manifests and tax records. One sequence of numbers refused to make sense. At first, she assumed she had entered a figure incorrectly. But every calculation produced the same alarming result. Millions of dollars had disappeared. Refusing to ignore the inconsistency, Penny spent the next several hours tracing every transfer through layers of encrypted accounts and shell companies until the truth emerged with horrifying clarity. More than $4 million had been systematically diverted into an account controlled by Tommy Sullivan under a false identity. The realization sent panic racing through her body. In the Mafia, discovering a traitor was often just as deadly as becoming one. She quickly attempted to close every file and convince herself to leave without telling anyone, hoping she could pretend she had never uncovered the conspiracy. Unfortunately, fate had already placed her directly in Tommy's path. The silence of the accounting office was shattered when Tommy Sullivan appeared in the doorway, accompanied by two heavily armed enforcers. His calm smile concealed unmistakable menace as his eyes drifted toward Penny's computer screen, where the reflection of confidential financial records remained faintly visible on the glass partition behind her desk. Penny desperately tried to explain that she was simply finishing routine paperwork, but Tommy immediately recognized that she knew far too much. Every word she spoke only confirmed his suspicion. The atmosphere turned suffocating as Tommy slowly approached her desk, praising her intelligence while making it painfully clear that clever people often met unfortunate ends when they looked where they were not supposed to. Penny fought to remain composed, denying everything despite the fear overwhelming her. Her trembling voice and tear-filled eyes betrayed the terror she could no longer hide. Tommy sighed with false disappointment before giving a simple order to his men. Within seconds, one enforcer clamped a powerful hand over Penny's mouth, while another pinned her arms against her body. She struggled desperately, kicking and fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. But she was hopelessly outmatched. A cloth soaked in chloroform covered her face, and the office lights dissolved into darkness as consciousness slipped away. By the time the building stood silent once again, Penny Abbott had vanished without a trace, taking with her the most dangerous secret the Romano Empire had ever faced. When Vincent Romano received Leo Campbell's call just after dawn, he immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. Penny Abbott had never been late to work in 4 years. Not once. And the concern in Leo's usually steady voice confirmed Vincent's worst fear before a single explanation was given. Within minutes, Leo reported that Penny's apartment had been violently ransacked. The front door had been kicked open, furniture overturned, and personal belongings scattered across the floor. The only living creature left behind was her frightened cat, crying helplessly in the kitchen as if it had witnessed the nightmare unfold. The moment Vincent heard those words, something inside him snapped. The carefully controlled crime boss who ruled Boston with cold precision disappeared, replaced by a man consumed by fear and uncontrollable rage. The coffee mug in his hand shattered beneath the pressure of his grip. Yet he barely noticed the blood running across his knuckles. All he could think about was Penny. The quiet woman who had unknowingly become the center of his world was gone, and someone would pay dearly for taking her. Without hesitation, Vincent transformed the entire city into a battlefield. Every corner of the Romano Empire received the same uncompromising order. No cargo ships were allowed to leave the harbor. Every truck connected to the syndicate was stopped and searched before crossing state lines. Private airfields were monitored. Highways were blocked. And every warehouse controlled by the family was inspected. Trusted captains mobilized hundreds of armed soldiers who flooded the streets, questioning informants, bribing contacts, and raiding the hideouts of rival gangs. Boston's criminal underworld quickly realized that this was no ordinary search. Vincent was no longer protecting his business or defending his territory. He was searching for one woman, and anyone standing in his way would become collateral damage. Men who had spent years avoiding the Romano family suddenly found themselves dragged into abandoned buildings and forced to answer questions through broken teeth and shattered bones. Every rumor was investigated. Every suspicious movement followed. And every possible lead pursued with relentless determination. Fear spread through the city's underworld because everyone understood the terrifying truth: Vincent Romano had declared war. Not for money or power, but for the woman he loved. While chaos consumed the streets of Boston, Penny endured a nightmare inside an abandoned warehouse hidden deep within the industrial district. Bound tightly to a heavy wooden chair beneath flickering warehouse lights, she struggled to remain conscious as bruises covered her arms and face. Tommy Sullivan demanded that she confess to stealing the missing money, knowing full well she was innocent. His threats became increasingly brutal. He promised to blame everything on her before eliminating the only witness capable of exposing his betrayal. Despite her overwhelming fear, Penny refused to surrender. Every insult, every slap, and every attempt to intimidate her only strengthened her determination to protect the truth. She understood that admitting to a crime she had never committed would not save her life. Tommy had already decided she would never leave the warehouse alive. Although terrified and exhausted, she held on to the faint hope that someone would realize she had disappeared before it was too late. In the silence between Tommy's threats, she found herself wondering whether Vincent had even noticed her absence. She had always believed she was invisible to him, unaware that he was already tearing an entire city apart to bring her home. Vincent personally led the search rather than remaining safely behind his desk. He visited underground casinos, illegal docks, abandoned factories, and every location connected to Tommy's criminal network. Information was gathered piece by piece through intimidation, interrogation, and carefully calculated violence. Several of Tommy's associates attempted to remain loyal, but none could withstand the pressure created by Vincent's relentless pursuit. On Abbott 1, frightened criminals began revealing fragments of information that slowly exposed Tommy's escape route. After nearly 14 exhausting hours, a terrified low-level gangster finally admitted that Penny had been taken to an abandoned meatpacking warehouse near the waterfront. Vincent wasted no time confirming the lead. His convoy of armored SUVs raced through the empty streets, engines roaring as they smashed through locked security gates without slowing down. Every second mattered because Vincent feared he might already be too late. The warehouse erupted into violence the instant the rescue team forced its way inside. Gunfire echoed through the massive concrete structure as Tommy's armed guards opened fire from behind rusted machinery and towering stacks of shipping containers. Vincent advanced through the battlefield with terrifying efficiency, eliminating every threat that stood between him and Penny. Leo coordinated the assault from the opposite side of the building, directing heavily armed soldiers to surround every possible escape route while providing covering fire for Vincent's advance. Smoke, flying debris, and deafening gunshots transformed the abandoned warehouse into a war zone. Bodies fell one after another as the Romano soldiers overwhelmed Tommy's defenses. Realizing his carefully planned operation was collapsing, Tommy retreated to an elevated catwalk overlooking the warehouse floor, preparing one final act of revenge before escaping into the darkness. Then Vincent saw her. Under a single swinging light sat Penny, bruised, exhausted, and tightly restrained to a wooden chair. The sight shattered every emotional barrier he had built throughout his life. The feared mafia king who had never shown weakness rushed across the blood-stained concrete without caring about the battle still raging around him. Dropping to his knees beside her, he carefully cut through the restraints with trembling hands, his breathing uneven as tears filled his eyes for the first time in years. Penny's weakened body collapsed into his arms the moment the bindings were removed. She instinctively flinched, expecting more pain, until she recognized the familiar voice whispering her name with heartbreaking tenderness. Vincent wrapped her tightly against his chest, burying his face in her hair as relief overwhelmed every emotion he had tried to suppress for so long. In that moment, nothing else existed, not the empire he ruled, not the enemies surrounding him, nor the fortune he possessed. Only Penny mattered. Their reunion lasted only seconds before Tommy emerged above them, mocking the scene while opening fire with an assault rifle. Without a moment's hesitation, Vincent threw his entire body over Penny, shielding her with his own as bullets ripped through the concrete around them. He never considered taking cover or protecting himself. His only instinct was to ensure that no bullet could reach the woman in his arms. One powerful round struck the protective vest covering his shoulder, driving him backward with tremendous force. Yet he refused to loosen his embrace. Penny felt his body absorb the impact while his heartbeat pounded violently against her cheek. Terrified, she begged him to stop risking his life. But Vincent ignored the pain completely. At that precise moment, Leo and the rescue team unleashed a devastating counterattack, forcing Tommy to flee the warehouse after suffering a serious gunshot wound. Even as blood soaked through his clothing, Vincent refused medical attention until he was absolutely certain Penny was safe, carrying her effortlessly in his arms despite his own injury. He looked into her frightened eyes and quietly told her something she had never heard before: she was never a burden, never too heavy, and never someone he intended to lose. In that single promise, Penny finally realized that the most feared man in Boston had been fighting. The journey back from the warehouse was a blur of flashing lights, whispered reassurances, and unbearable pain. Refusing to take Penny to a public hospital where questions could expose the Romano family, Vincent brought her directly to his private penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. Before they arrived, his trusted physician had already prepared everything necessary to treat both of them. Although a bullet had torn across Vincent's shoulder during the rescue, he ignored his own injury entirely, insisting that Penny receive medical attention first. As the doctor carefully examined her injuries, it became clear how much she had endured. Several cracked ribs, deep bruises covering her arms and shoulders, a severe concussion, and countless cuts told the story of Tommy Sullivan's cruelty. Throughout the examination, Vincent never allowed his eyes to leave her. Every wince of pain tightened his jaw. Every bruise fueled the quiet fury burning beneath his calm expression. For perhaps the first time in his life, the ruthless mafia boss felt completely powerless. He could eliminate enemies without hesitation, but he could not erase the suffering Penny had already experienced. When the doctor carefully removed the torn cardigan that had become stained with dirt and blood, Penny instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. Years of insecurity returned all at once as she became painfully aware of every curve she had spent her life trying to hide. Even after surviving a kidnapping, her greatest embarrassment was not the bruises covering her body, but the fear that Vincent would finally see her the way she had always seen herself: too large, too ordinary, and completely undeserving of his attention. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks as she apologized for how she looked. Unable to understand why someone as powerful and admired as Vincent had risked everything to save her. Instead of answering immediately, Vincent gently dismissed the doctor, knelt beside the sofa, and carefully took her trembling hands into his own. His voice softened in a way no one else had ever heard as he asked her never to hide from him again. To Vincent, the woman sitting before him was not defined by impossible beauty standards or cruel opinions from strangers. She was courageous, intelligent, compassionate, and wonderfully genuine in a world where almost everyone wore a mask. For years, Vincent had guarded a secret that even his closest allies never suspected. Looking directly into Penny's tear-filled eyes, he finally admitted that he had been quietly watching over her since the day she joined Harbor Freight. He remembered the small things no one else ever noticed, the way she absent-mindedly tucked her hair behind her ear whenever she became focused on difficult calculations, the soft smile she gave the office janitor every morning, the vanilla fragrance of her hand lotion lingering in the hallway after she walked by, and the determination with which she solved impossible accounting problems while everyone else underestimated her. Surrounded by corruption, greed, and endless deception, Penny had remained the only truly honest person in his world. He confessed that he had deliberately kept his distance because he believed his violent life would eventually destroy anyone he allowed himself to love. Yet the moment she disappeared, he realized that losing her would hurt far more than exposing his own heart. Penny listened in stunned silence, struggling to believe that the feared king of Boston had quietly carried these feelings for years without ever asking for anything in return. Every word slowly dismantled the walls of insecurity she had built around herself throughout her life. Before either of them could fully process the emotional confession, Leo Campbell entered the penthouse carrying the folder Tommy had left behind during the warehouse confrontation. Inside were meticulously forged financial statements, fabricated transaction histories, fake digital signatures, and electronic records carefully designed to make it appear that Penny herself had stolen the missing money. The deception was sophisticated enough that even experienced investigators could easily accept it as genuine evidence. According to the documents, every suspicious transfer originated from Penny's workstation, creating the perfect excuse for Tommy to eliminate her while presenting himself as the loyal captain who uncovered the theft. Vincent immediately understood the dangerous position they faced. Executing Tommy without exposing the truth could trigger retaliation from other mafia families who would believe he had murdered an innocent subordinate to protect his own reputation. The empire itself could collapse if Tommy's fabricated evidence remained unchallenged. Despite the pain radiating through her injured body, Penny insisted on examining the documents herself. The moment the files were placed in front of her, the fear that had dominated her thoughts since the kidnapping slowly gave way to calm concentration. Numbers had always been the language she understood best. And even through exhaustion, she immediately noticed subtle inconsistencies hidden beneath Tommy's elaborate forgery. Adjusting her glasses, she carefully analyzed the international transaction records, server timestamps, and encrypted authentication logs. Within minutes, she discovered a critical flaw that Tommy had overlooked. His forged transfers relied on transactions supposedly processed through Cayman banking servers during their scheduled weekly maintenance period, a window in which international wire transfers were technically impossible. The timestamps alone proved that the documents had been manufactured after the fact, rather than merely defending herself. Penny reconstructed every stage of Tommy's financial manipulation, demonstrating precisely how he had falsified the digital evidence. Vincent and Leo watched in complete amazement as the frightened victim from only hours earlier transformed into a brilliant financial investigator whose confidence grew stronger with every discovery. Determined to expose the entire conspiracy, Penny requested a secure laptop connected to the Romano family's encrypted network. For the next several hours, she traced thousands of hidden transactions across multiple jurisdictions, following an intricate trail that stretched from shell corporations in Belize to offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands before finally reaching a corporate trust account in Providence, Rhode Island. Tommy had believed these layers of international banking would permanently conceal the stolen money, but Penny's extraordinary understanding of global financial systems allowed her to connect patterns invisible to everyone else. Each discovery brought them closer to the truth until one final document appeared on the screen. Listed beside Tommy's hidden trust account was a second authorized signatory whose name instantly changed the nature of the entire investigation. Declan O'Connor, leader of the powerful Irish syndicate, had secretly become Tommy's financial partner. The revelation stunned everyone in the room. Tommy had not simply stolen millions of dollars for personal wealth. He had been secretly funding an alliance with the Irish crime family, preparing a coup that would overthrow Vincent Romano from within his own organization. The missing money was intended to finance weapons, recruit loyal soldiers, and strengthen the rival syndicate before launching a coordinated attack against the Romano Empire. What initially appeared to be a simple case of embezzlement had evolved into a carefully planned betrayal capable of igniting a full-scale mafia war across the East Coast. Looking at the completed investigation on the screen, Vincent realized that Penny had accomplished what none of his captains, advisors, or intelligence network had managed to uncover. She had not only cleared her own name but had also exposed the conspiracy threatening everything he had spent his life building. In that moment, everyone present understood that Penny Abbott was far more than a quiet bookkeeper. She had become the woman whose intelligence, courage, and unwavering integrity had saved the Romano family from destruction, proving beyond any doubt that she belonged beside the most powerful man in Boston, not because he had rescued her, but because together they made each other stronger. Armed with the evidence Penny had painstakingly uncovered, Vincent Romano finally knew exactly where Tommy Sullivan intended to disappear. The financial trail, reconstructed through countless encrypted transactions, had exposed not only the location of the stolen fortune but also Tommy's carefully planned escape route. There was no hesitation in Vincent's response. Before dawn, the Romano estate came alive with quiet efficiency as his most trusted soldiers prepared for what everyone understood would be the final confrontation. Black armored SUVs rolled into formation beneath the dim lights of the underground garage, while experienced bodyguards inspected assault rifles, loaded fresh magazines, and secured encrypted communication channels. Leo Campbell personally coordinated every detail, assigning snipers to strategic positions and dispatching advance teams to surround the destination long before Tommy could realize he had been discovered. Vincent equipped himself with calm precision, slipping a suppressed pistol beneath his long black coat while ignoring the pain that still radiated through his injured shoulder. The wound from the warehouse battle remained fresh, yet no one dared suggest delaying the mission. This was no longer simply about recovering stolen money or protecting the Romano Empire. Tommy had crossed the one line Vincent would never forgive by laying hands on the woman he loved. Several hours away, at a secluded private airstrip hidden on the outskirts of Providence, Tommy Sullivan believed victory was still within reach. Despite the bandages wrapped around his wounded shoulder, he moved frantically across the rain-soaked tarmac, barking impatient orders at the ground crew loading heavy duffel bags filled with cash onto a waiting Gulfstream jet. Every minute felt like an eternity as anxiety slowly replaced his confidence. His escape plan depended on reaching Ireland before Vincent could organize a pursuit where Declan O'Connor and the Irish syndicate would provide protection in exchange for the millions Tommy had stolen. Yet deep inside, he could not silence the growing fear that Vincent had somehow uncovered the truth. He repeatedly checked his watch, scanned the surrounding darkness, and reached instinctively for the pistol concealed beneath his jacket whenever distant headlights appeared along the access road. The money, the forged documents, and his new criminal alliance had all been carefully arranged. But even Tommy understood that escaping Vincent Romano required far more than careful planning. It required impossible luck. The roar of powerful engines shattered the uneasy silence moments before the private jet was scheduled to depart. One after another, black SUVs burst through the security gate, surrounding the aircraft from every direction with military precision. Their headlights illuminated the runway as dozens of heavily armed Romano soldiers stepped into formation, creating an impenetrable wall between Tommy and the waiting jet. At the center of the advancing column walked Vincent Romano. Rain dripped from the collar of his black overcoat, yet his expression remained terrifyingly calm. He carried no visible anger, no desperate urgency, only the quiet certainty of a man who had already decided how the night would end. Tommy instinctively reached for his weapon but froze when he realized there was nowhere left to run. The overwhelming force surrounding him erased every possibility of escape. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. The silence itself became more intimidating than any shouted threat. Eventually, Tommy lowered his pistol and attempted the only strategy he had left. He pleaded for mercy. He reminded Vincent of the years they had served together, of the loyalty he had once shown, and of the countless dangerous missions they had survived as brothers within the Romano family. He insisted that greed had clouded his judgment, claiming that financial pressure and fear had driven him toward betrayal. When those excuses failed to produce even the slightest reaction, Tommy shifted the blame elsewhere. He argued that the Irish syndicate had manipulated him, that Declan O'Connor had promised him protection and power impossible to refuse. Everything, Tommy insisted, had simply spiraled beyond his control. Vincent listened without interruption, his icy blue eyes never leaving the man kneeling before him. His silence carried far greater weight than any angry outburst. When Tommy finally exhausted every excuse, Vincent answered with a voice so calm that it chilled everyone standing nearby. Betraying the family for money was unforgivable. Conspiring with a rival syndicate to overthrow the Romano Empire was even worse. But neither offense compared to the one crime Vincent considered truly beyond redemption. Desperate to provoke a reaction, Tommy made one final mistake. A cruel smile spread across his face as he dismissed Penny with a sneer, insisting that Vincent had sacrificed everything for someone who meant nothing. He laughed bitterly before uttering the words that sealed his fate forever. "She's a fat nobody." The insult echoed across the rain-soaked runway. And for the first time that night, a visible change crossed Vincent's face. The terrifying calm disappeared, replaced by a cold fury so absolute that every soldier instinctively took a step backward. Vincent slowly closed the distance between them until only inches separated the two men. Looking directly into Tommy's frightened eyes, he spoke with unwavering conviction. Penny was never insignificant. She possessed more courage, intelligence, and loyalty than every traitor standing against the Romano family combined. She had exposed a conspiracy capable of destroying an empire, risked her own life to protect the truth, and reminded him that genuine strength came not from violence, but from unwavering integrity. To Vincent, she was not merely the quiet bookkeeper Tommy had underestimated. She was the woman who had become the heart of everything he fought to protect. Without another word, Vincent raised his pistol. Tommy's desperate pleas dissolved into panicked screams as he begged for one final chance, promising to return every stolen dollar and betray the Irish syndicate in exchange for his life. Vincent showed no hesitation. The single suppressed gunshot echoed across the empty runway, ending Tommy Sullivan's rebellion before it could plunge the East Coast into a devastating mafia war. Silence returned almost immediately, broken only by the distant hum of the aircraft engines and the rain falling against the pavement. Leo stepped forward to recover the bags containing the missing millions, while investigators seized every document linking Tommy to Declan O'Connor's organization. The evidence Penny had uncovered would now expose the entire conspiracy, ensuring that no rival family could question Vincent's actions or challenge his authority. Before leaving the airstrip, Vincent issued one final order. Tommy's body would be delivered directly to the Irish syndicate, together with a clear message: the Romano family neither forgave betrayal nor tolerated interference from outsiders. Anyone foolish enough to threaten those under Vincent's protection would meet exactly the same fate. With the stolen fortune recovered and the conspiracy destroyed, Vincent climbed back into his waiting vehicle. Yet, despite securing his empire, his thoughts never lingered on power, revenge, or victory. They returned only to Penny, the woman waiting for him at home, whose courage had not only exposed a traitor but had ultimately saved the future of the Romano family itself. The days following Tommy Sullivan's death marked the beginning of a life neither Penny Abbott nor Vincent Romano had ever imagined possible. For the first time in weeks, silence replaced the sound of gunfire, and peace slowly settled over the Romano estate. Under the care of Vincent's private physician, Penny's injuries gradually healed. The deep bruises that had once darkened her skin faded into pale yellow memories. Her cracked ribs became less painful with each passing day, and the nightmares that had haunted her every night slowly lost their grip. Vincent rarely left her side throughout her recovery. Despite the endless responsibilities of leading one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast, he found time every morning to share breakfast with her, personally reminded her to take her medication, and stayed beside her during the long evenings when old fears threatened to return. His quiet presence offered something Penny had never truly experienced before: complete safety. For the first time in her life, she no longer felt as though she had to face the world alone. Although her physical wounds were healing, The emotional scars remained far more difficult to overcome. Years of criticism, rejection, and insecurity could not disappear overnight. Whenever Penny caught her reflection in the enormous mirrors decorating Vincent's luxurious penthouse, she instinctively searched for flaws instead of progress. She still expected disappointment whenever she looked at herself. Sensing her lingering self-doubt, Vincent decided to show her what she had been unable to see for so many years. Without revealing his plans, he commissioned one of Boston's finest private designers to create a dress exclusively for her. Several days later, a carefully wrapped garment box arrived at the penthouse. Inside rested an elegant emerald green silk dress, unlike anything Penny had ever owned. The rich color reflected the warmth in her eyes, while the tailored design embraced every curve she had spent years trying to hide. Nervously, she slipped into the dress and stood before the mirror, expecting to feel the same embarrassment that had followed her throughout her life. Instead, she paused in complete silence. For the first time, she did not see a woman who needed to become someone else. She saw confidence. She saw elegance. She saw strength. The woman looking back at her was still Penny Abbott. But she finally recognized a beauty that had always existed beneath years of self-doubt. As she quietly admired her reflection, Vincent entered the room without saying a word. He stopped beside her, allowing the silence to linger before gently wrapping his arms around her waist. Looking into the mirror, he smiled with unmistakable admiration rather than surprise. He told her that the dress had not transformed her into someone beautiful because she had never lacked beauty in the first place. It had merely revealed what she had been too afraid to believe. Vincent reminded her that throughout the years he had never fallen in love with appearances. He had fallen in love with the woman who quietly solved impossible financial puzzles while everyone else overlooked her brilliance. He loved the kindness she offered strangers without expecting anything in return, the courage she displayed even while terrified, and the unwavering honesty that survived inside a world built on deception. To him, Penny had never been invisible. She had always been extraordinary. Hearing those words, Penny finally understood that the confidence growing inside her no longer depended on mirrors or the opinions of other people. It came from recognizing her own worth through the eyes of someone who truly understood her. The weeks that followed transformed far more than Penny's appearance. She became an active partner in rebuilding the Romano organization after Tommy's betrayal. Using her extraordinary financial expertise, she redesigned the syndicate's accounting systems, strengthened international security protocols, and eliminated vulnerabilities that had allowed Tommy to hide his theft for so long. What had once been a dangerous secret operation evolved into a far more disciplined organization under her guidance. Even the experienced captains who had initially underestimated the quiet bookkeeper soon sought her advice before making major financial decisions. Penny no longer apologized for speaking with confidence or questioned whether she deserved to be heard. She had proven not only to Vincent but also to herself that intelligence, resilience, and integrity could reshape an empire far more effectively than fear alone. Watching her flourish brought Vincent a satisfaction greater than any victory he had ever achieved through violence. One quiet evening as the sun disappeared beyond the Boston skyline, Vincent invited Penny onto the private terrace overlooking the harbor where their journey had begun to change. The city lights shimmered across the water while a gentle breeze carried away the last remnants of the painful months they had survived together. Standing beneath the evening sky, Vincent admitted that power, wealth, and fear had earned him control over an empire, but had never brought him genuine happiness. Everything changed the moment Penny entered his life. He confessed that rescuing her had shown him what truly mattered, and that no throne, fortune, or criminal empire could ever replace the peace he found simply by hearing her laugh. Taking both of her hands, he promised that whatever future awaited them, they would face it together, not as a mafia boss and his employee, but as equals who had saved one another in different ways. Penny had rescued his heart just as surely as he had rescued her life. Whether through a quiet promise or an unspoken proposal, Both understood that their future had already begun. Penny accepted that future with complete certainty. Not because Vincent possessed power or influence, but because he had always seen the person she struggled to recognize within herself. The frightened woman who once hid beneath oversized cardigans no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood that confidence is not measured by appearance but by courage, compassion, and self-respect. She had survived betrayal, violence, and fear without allowing those experiences to define her. Instead, they revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. Together, Penny and Vincent proved that genuine love is built upon loyalty rather than perfection, trust rather than status, and unwavering devotion rather than outward beauty. Their story became more than a tale of revenge against a traitor or the victory of one criminal empire over another. It became a reminder that the deepest scars can heal when someone believes in us before we are capable of believing in ourselves. Penny did not simply find the love of her life. She rediscovered her own value, embraced the confidence she had hidden for years, and stepped into the future as the woman she had always been destined to become. And as Vincent looked at her with the same quiet admiration that had begun years earlier, he knew that every battle he had fought, every sacrifice he had made, and every difficult choice along the way had led him to the greatest treasure he would ever possess, not an empire, but the remarkable woman standing beside him,